Hello everyone and welcome to this video on timeline charts. We would like to plot a timeline chart on this data. Again, the explanation of the data has been provided as a part of the data overview video which is provided along with this course. Now, for that I would like to create a query. Now, as we understood, a timeline video is nothing, a timeline chart is nothing but I would like to have on a, on a some timeline basis, I would like to have some milestones defined, and I want the system to plot these milestones for different events. So very much heavily used as a part of project management. But I would like to create a query which could suit to this purpose also. So I am more interested. I'll create a query where we can use a couple of good formulas of Excel also. Right. So I can very well create, let's say I call it as a timeline chart, and my query is create a timeline for the different centuries scored by the selected person, selected player. The different, not even centuries, let's call different for different thousands, for each thousand scored by the selected player. So I would like to know when he has scored 1000 runs, when he has scored 2000 runs, and something like that. So that's how I would like to plot the data. Right. So for that I would like to create a timeline chart. All right. So we are creating a timeline chart for that. So for that I need to know how many thousands are scored by that player. I mean, did he cross 3000, 4000? If so, in which match? That is what is the information I would like to display in that timeline chart. So I need to set my data exclusively for that purpose. First of all, I need to know the thousands which are scored by the person. So that's where I was thinking. That I do some kind of adjustment to find out the cumulative score of the selected player. We don't have the selected player. We would like to find out the cumulative score so that I can make out when he has crossed 100, 200 and so on. So that's where I would like to create one column called cumulative. How I would like to update that is, if the player name matches with the one that is given in the drop down. So if this name matches with the one that is given in the drop down, I would like to update the runs. For the first row I'll do this. I'll take it as runs. Otherwise I'll take it 0. So this is as far as the first row is concerned, first row of the data. Whereas from the later rows, I'll do a cumulative addition. What I'll simply do is, if this name matches with the dashboard, the name of the person with a F4 giving me $1, this time I'll go back to this run sheet and I'll simply do an addition to this value, to the already existing value. I will add up the new runs that are coming up here. Otherwise, put a comma and I'll simply carry on with the earlier value itself, which means Whenever that name of the person comes up, I would add up his values because it's extra runs which he has scored in that particular match. So I would like to add up that one. Otherwise, I'll continue with the previous cumulative score itself. Now, just let's try to drag this. What we observe is I come to the last. I see that this person's cumulative score is 3,886 till date. Now let's try changing the name of the person to something. Let's say I'll put S.R. Tendulkar in this. I would see that my cumulative is updated with this, and I see that the cumulative runs is 18,426. All we have done in this formula, we have various mechanisms to do this cumulative stuff, but I thought we can go with this kind of a mechanism. Right. The way is the moment I change the name of the person, here the values get updated. We can handle it with a VBA also, but here I am trying to drive this process even without using a VBA. So just a formula based kind of stuff will solve the purpose also. So you don't need to really learn the different tricks of VBA. Of course, if you learn, that will definitely add value to your dashboard, but I'm trying to provide some other alternative mechanisms to the usage of VBA for plotting the same kind of dashboards. All right. Now I have got the cumulative scores, but now I need to find out when did that person cross that 1,000. Right. I want to find out when did that person cross the 1,000. So that's where I would like first of all to set my data to my requirement. So I'll call this also a timeline chart. Now the first thing I need to plot as a part of the timeline chart is how many hundreds he has scored. I mean how many thousands he has crossed. Right. So number of thousands, I'll simply put the maximum runs of that list of that cumulative equal to max. In that I give input as runs p column, which will make it 18,000, and if required I can divide this by 1,000, but I take, so if I do it, so I get 18.426. I simply do an integer of that, or I do a round down, anything is fine. I do an integer of, I just get that this person has scored 18,000. So what I'll simply do is, now I'll start creating. I'll create something as runs which will contain 1,000, 2,000 and so on. Right. And I also require let's say match number, in which match he has scored that 1,000. Right. In which game he has scored that 1,000. And yeah, we also require the date on which that 1,000 has been scored. All right, let me go with these three to start with. Now I need to fill this area with 1,000, 2,000 and so on, but I want it dynamically to be filled. So that's where what I'll do is I'll simply say if this value is greater than 0, I'll call this as 1,000, otherwise I'll leave it as blank. Right, so the first thing comes out as 1,000. Now what I'll do is, if this value is already given as blank, I will leave it as blank. Otherwise, I'll simply check once more. saying if this value is greater than, or this value multiplied by 1000 is greater than or equal to the previous value. If it is greater than or equal to previous value, I'll simply add up 1000 to this. Otherwise, I'll just leave it as blank. Now, what is the logic which we are using here? I'm checking up to the value greater than or equal to that how many thousands he has scored. Now here I get 2000. All I can do very much is drag it down. Right, there's some, yeah, I need the required dollars for B125. I'll put the required dollar before I do the dragging process. Now I can very well drag this. Yeah, here is where it is causing a problem. I don't think greater than or equal to is required. I just need greater than. Now let's see. Yeah, it is ending up with 18,000 itself. If required, I'll even drag it a little bit so that I'll get runs even up to that extent. Now, how do I get the match number for this person? In that cumulative, I can actually do the counting, because I can. So if we just check out our numbers, let's say 1000. Where is this 1000 coming up? All right, the 1000 is coming up here, right? Which means if I try to find out the match, if I try to use match in some form, I can typically make out, so in which row that 1000 has come up. If I can try to find out the matching for that, then I should be able to find out how many matches are there up to that extent. So there are multiple ways in which I can try that. Either I can try doing a counting, right? Let me try to use a count if the value less than or equal to 1000, but of course I need to add 1 to that, because when I say value less than or equal to 1000, it counts only up to here, but the real 1000 has been scored in this match, so I'll add up 1 to that resulting value, but that's not the problem, right? Let's see if I use count if, right? I can use multiple ways. I may say count if, or I'll use count ifs, because one, the player name should match. So I'll go to this runs column, run sheet, in the B column, comma, I'll match it with the name of this player. And the second rule I'll set is in the runs column, run sheet, under this cumulative column, I'll simply say less than, I put it in quotes with an ampersand. I select it to this location, 1000. Now with this, what I get is, yeah, I can put the necessary dollar here for dashboard C1. I'll do, so what I'm getting is less than 1000. The name of the person matches and the value less than 1000. Let me see how this formula is getting written. Yeah, the name of the player should match and the runs. Oh, I have to do it on cumulative. I think I did it on the wrong column. Yeah, I have to do it on this P column. Right. So now I am getting that this person has scored 30. In this 35th match, he has scored 100,000 and so on. In his 450th match, he has scored 18,000 and so on. Now, what we are able to make out here is, it is showing zeros here. So, what I should very well do is, I put some kind of error handling, simply saying, if this value is equal to blank, I'll retain it as blank, otherwise do this entire process. So which means I'll put this as a part of the formula and close it. Now I drag it, right? It plots only up to 450 here, which is really fine. So even if we want to try it out with some other person, we should be able to try out. Right, let me try out with some other person here. I see that this person has scored up to 11,000. Here also the data is existing only up to 11,000 and the match numbers are typically displayed here. Now, but I need the date also on which it has been scored. So for this it would have been better if I had got the row number corresponding to that value. Yeah, even here I need to increment this value by 1 because less than or equal to is what it is giving. So on the next match he has scored actually the 1000, which means this entire count ifs here inside I'll just increment it by 1 so that I come to know slightly better. Yeah, these are the values and these are the matches in which those are scored. But yeah, it would have been better because I need to get date and probably a lot of other stuff. It would have been better if I had got the row number corresponding to that matching. So that's where instead of using countifs, if I had used the match function to generate it, it would have been even a better stuff. But yeah, nevertheless, now we can look at using a match formula to just get the row number. So row number, so that we'll use it for various other purposes. So I'll say I want the row number corresponding to that match, so which I can get through this match function. I would like to look up for this value, which is 1000, comma, the lookup array is that cumulative stuff, which is from the P column, and I would not do an exact match because getting 1000 exactly would not be possible. So I'd like to go for a less than match, which means I'll give 1 as the parameter here. I'll get a less than match. So I'm getting the date as 31st October 2009. No, this is the row number. Actually, it's not the date. Let me format it slightly better. I get the date. I put it as a general. I get this value as 3592nd row. And the same logic, I drag it down. Probably I'll get until a certain point. Now, here I don't need again the same logic. If this value remains blank, I'll still make it blank. Otherwise, I'll update it with a value. Fine. So I'll drag it accordingly itself. Yes. So now this is the row number in which this particular person had reached the 1000. Again, When you look at the row number 3592, just go to this row number 3592 before we establish. I say I go to 3592. It is one value before, one row before the actual person itself, because we are talking of less than match. So it is in this match the value has actually gone to 1011. He has crossed the 1000, which means I have to add up one more row to make my settings much better, which means the row number has to actually be incremented by 1. This is the row number in which he has reached the 1000, 2000, and so on. Now I can very well use the index function to arrive at that date, right? So I'll say equal to index on the date column, which is the k column of the run sheet, comma, which row come into the data settings, and point it to this row number, which is D129. That way you will get the date. Yeah, you are getting it in this format. So all you can do is do a format cells, make it as a date, and select the format of this choice. So it says on 24th August 97, he has actually scored his first 1000 runs. And you drag it, again it is showing a lot of hash values and all that stuff. Again the same logic we can apply, right? If this value equal to blank, I'll keep it as blank, otherwise I'll update it with a value. All right, so I'll drag it down. Now this time I'm getting a very good clarity on when he has scored how many 1000 runs. Now it's time for us to actually create a timeline chart. Yeah, but let me tell you, to create a good timeline chart with proper values and all, probably I may even pull out the country against which he has scored those runs, right? So I'll even say the country, which could very well be obtained from again the index formula. I'll say index. This time I put it on the I column of the runs, comma, in the data setting sheet I'll again point it out to this run. So it comes out that this person had scored against Sri Lanka. Again the same logic I should be able to use. I'll simply say equal to if this value equal to blank, leave it as blank, otherwise update it with a value. Now we are getting a well decent kind of values updated. So we see that the 1000, 2000 have been scored against different countries. Now I would also like to make this as a data label. I want to plot this entire stuff saying I can make a kind of text which I would combine 1000 in match number 34 against Sri Lanka. I would like to write like that. So for this I'll use a concatenate formula where I'll add, okay, 1000, comma, I'll write it as against, comma, I'll mention Sri Lanka, comma, I'll put in with a space in match number. I put this entire thing in quotes and put a comma and then put 34. So it gets written here as 1000 against Sri Lanka in match number 34. So the same logic again, because otherwise it looks pretty odd. If this value equal to blank, I would like to maintain it as blank, otherwise display the value. So we have to be quite comfortable in the writing of the formulas. Right. Now I have this kind of a text. One good thing I suggest for plotting this timeline chart is to you take one variable called dummy, introduce a new variable called dummy. I'll tell you the reason for that. But initially you take a variable called dummy where all the values will be 0 itself. Probably if required you can change the values for them slightly later. But right now where I simply say if this value equal to blank, leave it as blank, otherwise put it as 0. I will actually plot a chart with this dummy so that I can have two different series to be plotted, and for one of them I'll put one axis, the other one I'll put other axis. I'll show you this. Now with this data I'm ready to plot a timeline chart. All I require in reality is one, I require the date and time, right? So something of this I require. Then I'll require this dummy. We'll see why we require this dummy. Then I would also use, I will use another column for height, which will typically plot one line and write the necessary text on that line. That is where I'll use the height for, right? So some kind of an extension line. So what I'll do is for that, I will simply take 1, 2, 3, 4. I can do something like that. So that's where I'll simply take mod of this number divided by 1000 comma 4. So I'll put 4 numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Again with the same logic. If this value equal to blank, I'll leave it as blank, otherwise I keep it. See, there are two things that are important in a timeline chart. One, now I require actually a 4 to be written, but there are zeros. So what I can very well do is I'll do +1. That would be much better because at any point in time, right, even a 0 would be handled to 4 and so on. That makes things more comfortable. All right. So this is what I'll maintain the height. Now the reason why I have maintained the height also is I would like to plot at different heights. I want to show this text, right? I'll show you what I'm doing in this now. So I will require this height as one more value. All right, I'll take this height as one more value. Then I'll take this text. So these are the four things I'll use for the plotting of this chart. Of course, enhancements, you can improvise on it to whatever extent possible. Now, the other thing for me is creating a parameters for each of these four, creating a namespace because this set keeps dynamically changing, right? So I'll create the namespace, the names, I'll define the names for these four columns so that it becomes easier for us to do the plotting of the chart. All right. So what I will simply do is I'll define one name, go into formulas tab. I'll define one name, which I call it as, I'll call all of them with timeline, timeline underscore date, where I'll simply put equal to offset. We'll use that offset because it can change dynamically. I'll put it to this location, data settings C28. Then I'll say 0 rows, 0 columns because we are in the same column and same row. Or I can say 1 row so that I don't need the heading to be selected. So I'll say 1 row, 0 columns. Then the number of rows to go down for the selection, number of rows to be selected would simply be this number. whatever are the number of thousands scored by the person, I would select them to that number. So 11 rows will be selected and obviously one column. This would be the name I am defining for timeline date, which means when I use timeline date, it will simply give me only this data. The same way I can do for timeline text. Alright, let me use it again. Timeline underscore text. Here also I'll create an offset equal to offset. This time I will point it to this one. I say 1, 0. This entire thing remains the same. Number of rows to be selected is equal to the number of thousands he has scored and with a 0. Or one column to be selected. So that's where I'll give 1 here. Then same way I can do for dummy. I'll create one more name. I call it as timeline underscore dummy with the same exercise equal to offset. This is to make your chart more and more dynamic. 1 row, 0 columns. The number of rows to be selected is still 11 and 1 column to be selected. So even there is a timeline underscore dummy, and you can even create a timeline underscore height. Even this will do the same thing, equal to offset. Put this height column, then 1 row, 0 columns. The height to be selected is still 11 and 1 column. Alright, so we have defined 4 names. I just need to check if I have used the timeline underscore date properly or not. Let me just, yeah, if you put your cursor here, it will actually do the selection for the, so this is what we require as a part of our plotting process. Now what I'll do is, first I'll take the date and dummy and plot a line chart. So we'll find the line completely on the x-axis itself because the y-axis values are completely zeros. Right? So between the date and the dummy, I'll plot a line chart. So that I'll get it as a straight line on the x-axis without any kind of a plotting. So let me do that. I'll say insert a line chart. Right, I'm inserting a line chart. Yeah, all this whatever the default plotting it has done, I would remove all those plots. Right, I'll remove all the plottings, let it be a blank one. Then I will add one series here, which I'll call it as dummy, and values wise I will call it as equal to cricket analysis.xlsx exclamation timeline underscore dummy. Alright, now we are seeing that there is something that has come out exclusively on the x-axis. Fair enough. Now now actually I can make the x-axis labels equal to cricket analysis dot xlsx hyphen or exclamation timeline underscore date. So I'll get all the dates on the x-axis. I'll get the dates on the x-axis. Right. So this is how the x-axis is getting plotted. And now we see that there are gaps that are shown on this x-axis. So what I can very well do is I go to this format axis and I will call this as a text axis. The moment I call it as a text axis, all the values will be uniformly distributed. So that's where I can go back and call it as a date axis itself. But if I'm calling it as a date axis, the values are not coming out properly. Right? I want the values to be displayed. I can take the values on the x-axis as a date type, which will give me something like this. Alright, let's try to handle it. Then the only thing is you see the gaps. Yeah, between this and this, there's a huge gap. Between this and this, there's a huge gap. But between these two, the gap is very, very less. That is one way you can try to address. Now what I would like to do is, I will plot for corresponding to each of these things. I will plot the height corresponding to each of these dates. So for that, I will simply add up, go to the select data. I'll add one more series called height. I'll call this series name as height, and the values I simply call it as cricket analysis dot xlsx exclamation timeline underscore height. Alright, using this I get some kind of a chart like this. Right, I am getting some kind of a chart like this. What I should clearly look at doing is, I sort of change this to a line chart, change this to a column chart, change series chart type, make it as a column chart. Alright, let me try doing that. Yeah, I keep getting that this is a column chart, right? Each one is on a separate column. So we find that the gaps are being displayed accordingly. Right, somewhere in the middle the data has been shown and the appropriate gap is being displayed. Now what I would like to create is, so this kind of a gap is there. Now what I will try to create is, I take a right, I click on the, I do a right click on this, and if you typically see, if you expand it heavily, we see that it's a column chart. Right, if we expand it heavily, we see that it's a column chart, but we see that there is a spacing as per the timeline. Now what I should think of doing is, I right click on this chart. I don't want it as a column, I just want it as a simple line. So before that, I first start adding a data label to it. For that, go and select the data. This height, for this height, right now the label is being shown as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What I'll do is, I'll edit this and I will equate it to, instead of doing it, we will write our formula, equal to cricket analysis dot xlsx exclamation timeline underscore text. This is what we have defined for that location. So this is what is the value that came out for height, and this is what is the values that are existing for dummy. Now what I would like to do is, I want it as a single line rather than too much of a bar or something. So that I will try to handle through error bars. Through the error bar. How do I get that error bar? I'll go to this layout. I have error bars here. I'll choose more error bar options because I want the line right from the x-axis till that particular point. Right from the x-axis till that particular point, I want the line. So what I'm simply going to do is, I'll right from the top, I'll look only on the negative side with an error of almost 100%. So that it comes till the last. That line comes till the last. Now you see there is a line that got plotted right from the top till the x-axis, because corresponding to the top value, it will give me plus or minus something. That is what is an error bar. Now here I am not taking the plus side, only the minus side, and I said minus 100%, which means the entire data would typically be presented for us. Now after that, all I can do is I can select my chart. Right, I can select my chart. Here it's not getting selected because of the small size. I can go into this layout, into the drop down here. I say series height. Okay, I'm able to select this series height. I'll just change the color of it. Format data series. Make it no fill and make it no border. So only one single straight line is observed in the process. Alright, now you see there is only a single straight line, and if required I can do some kind of formatting to this error bar, where I can put a line color of my choice. Right, I put some kind of red color or some kind of dark blue color. I can really choose what I want, and the line style also I could put up a width of something if required, and yeah, I can set it more like this. Alright, some kind of settings to it, and it is giving me some values. Now I need the labels also to be displayed. So for that, what I'll simply do again is I'll select this series, whichever I have made it as invisible and all. I'll select this series of height, and I simply say data label. More data label options. Instead of displaying that value, I'll display the category, or I'll display the category. Now when I'm no, it's not the category. Alright, let me just check out. I do a right click, select data. For this height data series, yeah, this is what is the category. Right, so what I can very well do is select this height data series, select this height data series, and say data labels. Or there is some problem with the height data series. Let's see what is the problem. I will go only with a category name. It's giving me the same date. Yeah, what I can also do is I'll take this height and try to plot it on the secondary axis. I'll take this height, right, and take it on to the secondary axis. So I say format data series, I carry it on to the secondary axis so that I get some kind of a flexibility in the usage here. Alright. Now I am getting something better, but what is happening in the first three? Right, I'm getting the 1,000 against all these in each of these matches, but something is not coming out for the first three. Okay, let me check out what is the problem here. Yeah, now we have got for each of the stuff. When I'm saying show data labels, probably this data labels are not required for showing, so even that zeros, probably I should say that I don't want the data labels. Only for zeros I don't want, but probably for this the data labels are still making a lot of sense. Now what I should simply do for these data labels is reduce their fonts so drastically, right? And if possible, I should even transform them. So I go to format data labels. Instead of putting it on outside end, right, I may say inside base, and I may translate it in the alignment. I'll make it minus 90 degrees. No, yeah, I'm making it minus 90 degrees, and horizontal alignment probably I'd like to make it right or something where I'm not able to get anything on that. So one way for me is manually, let's say if I'm trying to move them a little bit, then it's not looking that good. So if possible, I can try to move them a little bit manually. So, and even increase their font a little bit, so that otherwise I can reduce the text. So this is one way I should be able to handle it. So what I'll do is I'll remove this, and if required, let me again work around. Let me see something if something can be improvised. I go to this initially I put a none to this data labels, then I am bringing back the data label. I go to this more data label options. Instead of values, I'll get to the category. To right now it is looking more and more cluttered, the category. So what if I try to make it centered, even it is cluttered. So the outside end itself is a much better position, because we are anyhow going with different sizes from that perspective itself. And what I can simply try doing is reduce the font, right? And outside end itself is better, but what I can think of doing is reduce the font. Yeah, when once the font is reduced, looks slightly better, right? If there is any other thinner font, we should be able to try out those thinner fonts, probably even with 6 or 5 kind of a size. So you can actually play around. Now that here, or if I try removing my grid lines, things would be slightly better. So let me remove the grid lines. Yes, fair enough. And even I should be able to delete the axis now, because now the timelines and all are pretty much fine. And even this label here also, I don't require my data label. So what I can simply do is I can make this data label off. So this data label does not exist, and if required, even this point, I can change the series chart type into a simple line instead of having that kind of a point there. So this gives me the required stuff, and even here I should be able to take out this axis, right? This is also fine, and even this right side axis I'll take it out to make it more and more clear. Now at least the data is looking decently fine, but if we can use a slightly better font, it may still solve the purpose. But yeah, just to try out one more, I select the data labels, go to this more data label options, and I would like to see if some kind of alignment or something can be done. So the text direction, what if I do this way? Yeah, slightly better, right? Not that much cluttered. The text direction is slightly better. So let's do this part. The text direction can very well be aligned to 270 degrees, and rest all should be fine. Then if required, slightly increase the font size to make it, now it's not that cluttered, so I can very well think of increasing the font size. Even this data label again surfacing up, what I should do in this case is again do a no data label. So turn off the data label. So this is what is my timeline chart. So now make it as smaller as possible so that we should be able to fit it in our dashboard. Right now again, if it is looking more and more cluttered, the only option is reduce your font again. So you can very well play around in terms of the presentation of that, right? I'm not going to dwell even more detailed into it, but at the end we are getting the data that is required to be presented, right? You expand it to whatever extent you want. Right. I think I can reduce first of all in this direction, or even the text, let's reduce it. Instead of having this much, I'll say text 1000 against, instead of taking that country name, okay, we'll have to, if there is a possibility, we should be able to bring the shortcut to that. So whenever, instead of having Sri Lanka, probably I need to have SRI or the 1000, instead of writing in match number 34, right? I will try to modify it 1000. I say I'll put a bracket and I'll put a quote here. Then I'll simply put the number 34. Then I'll again close the bracket. So that way at least I should be able to save some space instead of saying in match number 34. So we can very well talk about that part. So I'll remove this part and against this country. So if I leave it slightly, it is saving my space, right? Somewhat better. Even this country also I can do it the similar way, right? Instead of having Sri Lanka or something, right? Instead of having this country, which is E29, I'll do VLOOKUP of this country in, we have actually created the conversion. Let's say something like this. Or even if I would like to keep it as it is for time being, I can keep it, and at least it is showing me slightly better the runs as well as the match number in which those are scored, even that is visible very clearly. So I'll come to this dashboard sheet. I'll try to give this location for that timeline chart. So I'll merge this, right? If required, I'll go with this format, and yeah, merge this entire stuff. And here I would like to write timeline chart for each 1,000 runs. Then I will simply copy or cut the chart from here, come here, do the pasting. Yeah, I'll do the necessary adjustment. So this you should be able to plan out. I'll do the adjustments in all directions. Then I remove the necessary borders. So plot area, I say no fill. Even the chart area, I should select and say no fill. No fill, no border, nothing. No fill, no border. Right. I select the plot area to occupy almost the entire space in all directions. And now that's it. I get 1,000 in the 34th match, 2,000 in the 56th match. You see actually the gap. So I can very well say this person had a huge gap between 10,000 runs and 11,000 runs. So that way the graph should easily explain this entire scenario for me. Right, I just extend it. No, if I'm extending it, so I'll just contract it a little bit more so that it comes into that shaded region itself. So this gives me like, okay, 6,000 against this, or even that against as a word also I should be able to take out. Instead of against, I'll simply write it as versus. So that itself will solve a few words. So it all depends on how we would like to format that stuff. Now this is looking slightly better and clear. Now what you can think of doing is change the name of the person here. I think you should be able to observe. Yeah, for this person between his 1,000 and 2,000 there is a huge gap, and probably 6,000 and 7,000 there is a gap, and so on. So we are able to observe these things much better, right? And one more aspect probably would have got introduced is the zero itself. When did he start? So yeah, I mean, now that you have a clarity on how this can be done, I think you should go ahead with trying out the usage of this chart, right? So I'll select this entire space. I'll put the necessary border to it, and this is what I call as my timeline chart for each. So 1,000 runs wise, I am able to bring out in which match he has scored his 1,000 against which country. So I take a smaller guy, I'll get a slightly smaller timeline. right? So I'm just getting around 1000 and 2000. That's it. Because this person has scored only up to 2000, only 2000, and there's a huge gap between his 1000 and 2000. So that way you can very well, so he has scored only 2300 runs, and that's what is being displayed by your timeline chart. Now, if I go to someone else, I see again, yeah, he had a huge gap between his 2000 and 3000. Similarly, between 4000 and 5000, whereas 1000 to 2000 he reached pretty fast, and 5000 to 6000 was also decently faster. So we can actually make our this kind of an analysis in a much better manner, right? If required, we could have added a couple of more rows to make things more and more attractive. But I think now you are comfortable enough in terms of preparing this kind of a timeline chart. All right. I hope you have got some level of comfort level in preparing this timeline chart. If you have any further queries on this, please do get back to me on 919848012123. You can drop in an email at vamsidhar@pacegurus.com, and I suggest you visit the website www.pacegurus.com for any further updates relating to the trainings, consultings, and videos on Excel, VBA, SPSS, dashboards for the domains of finance and analytics. Thanks a lot for listening to this video. Thank you very much. Bye bye.